So I wanted to just point out a few other important pieces to your MPC, MPS, and multipliers for your upcoming exam. So I've highlighted just a few things in the PowerPoint that should help review you for the upcoming exam. So again, touching on your disposable income, it's going to be the income at your disposal. So remember, we're talking about the most important determinant of your consumption and savings is what you do from that income. You either consume it or you save it. Two different things. We know that that disposable income comes from that net income that you make. Net meaning we're subtracting something out. That's what you get on your paycheck, and we know that after taxes, the income left over is at your disposal. So the net amount. Notationally, we're going to use the variable y to represent income. Remember, income could be expenditures, could be GDP, how we refer to it in some of the other areas when we discuss income itself. The different equations that we have, and we'll work more with these later, but just to recall from class, we've got our first equation represented by y subscript d, so yd equals y minus t. So disposable income is equal to income minus taxes. And make a note, this is just a bullet point here, not a negative sign. So disposable income equals income minus taxes, or we could also say that disposable income equals consumption plus savings. So two things you do with your money, you either consume it or you save it. So with our consumption and savings, we have a few terms to define our autonomous consumption, C sub 0, the portion of consumption that is not related to income. So you'll work more with this later, but for now just use the vocabulary. And again, the prefix auto means like itself. So it comes from itself, not related to income. So we can think of that amount of consumption when income is actually 0. So what we'll see later on next week is that it's the amount of consumption, income is 0, and so it's consumption spending essentially that you already have. Another new term is your MPC, which is your marginal propensity to consume. So again, think marginal as additional, propensity the rate, and then consumption. So how much are you consuming as far as the rate at which you're consuming? So mathematically, the MPC is calculated by taking the change in consumption spending divided by the change in income. So we'll actually get a decimal number here. So as an example, maybe we have 0.75, right? So 0.75 would be our MPC. For the MPS, we're again looking marginal propensity to save. So marginal additional propensity rate to our savings. So calculating the change in savings divided by the change in income. So to continue our example, if above our MPS was 0.75, then, MPC, then our MPS would have to represent the rest, which would be 0.25. And so then our final piece here is that the MPC plus the MPS equals 1. So we know that, again, the two things we do with our disposable income is we spend it or save it, and then that would equal our total 100% done. So a little bit more on our multiplier. Our spending multiplier is when we have a dollar injected into the economy, will have an impact beyond its initial expenditures. So that dollar continues to be spent multiplying its way through the economy. So if I spend $1, then that becomes income for someone else, and then they're going to spend it or save it. Then that next piece will become, again, income for someone else, the portion going to save it or spend it. So it circulates through the economy, and the number of times that it circulates, we call that the multiplier. It's going to be a number that we can calculate. So the larger the MPC, the more consumption as a result of that increase in income. This will result in a larger multiplier. So all that means is the larger our rate of consuming will thus be a larger multiplied effect. which should make sense because the more money we're injecting into the economy will be a larger result overall. Okay, so a positive and a positive, if you will. So spending multiplier effect. So that initial change in spending, again, with aggregate demand, consumption, investment, government, or net exports, will cause a larger change in the aggregate spending or aggregate demand overall. So the initial change becomes a larger overall change once we see that multiplied effect spending throughout the economy. So we can look at the multiplier as being that change in aggregate demand divided by a change in spending. Or in other words, that change in aggregate demand divided by that change in one of those 4 spending components. All right, but we'll simply calculate it using the spending multiplier, which should be coming up next. So let's look at an example. You may see something that says if the government increases defense spending, so remember defense is military, by $1 billion, then defense contractors are going to hire and pay more workers, which will then increase aggregate spending by more than that original $1 billion. So again, that's spending throughout the economy from that initial $1 billion. Once those workers have more income on their own, they spend the money as well, and we see a larger than $1 billion change overall. To calculate our spending multiplier, it's calculated from our MPC or MPS. Depending on what is given, we can get to it either way. And it is as follows. It is 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. Well, recall that all this is the MPS, right? Because MPC, MPS equals 1. So a simplified way to write it is just using 1 over the MPS. So the multipliers will be positive when there's an increase, negative when there's a decrease. So you'll see these later again with examples when we are told that there's an increase or a decrease in whatever's happening in our different scenarios. But for now, also just focus on 1 divided by the MPS to calculate the multiplier. So let's take a closer look. If the MPC is 0.8, then what is the multiplier? Well, let's go back. If the MPC is 0.8, then our MPS is going to have to be 0.2. Because remember, MPC, MPS equals 1. So if I'm spending 80% of that dollar, I must be saving 20% of that dollar. So what's the multiplier? So 1 divided by the MPS, which I know to be 1 over 0.2, and 20 cents into a dollar, or 1 divided 0.2, is simply 5. So my multiplier is 5. So let's take a look at another example. If my MPS is 0.4, what's the multiplier? Well, this time we're given the 0.4, our MPS, directly. So we can go ahead and substitute in 1 divided by the MPS, which is equal to 1 divided by 0.4. And I know solving, I get 2.5 is my multiplier. So keep in mind, again, the larger that MPC, more money towards consumption, 0.8 versus 0.4 here, the larger that multiplier, 5 versus 2.5. So more spending injected into that economy. So here's another quick example. Assume U.S. citizens spend 90 cents for every extra dollar they earn. Further assume the real interest rate decreases and we see an increase in private investment. What's the effect? So I will first calculate the MPC and MPS, which I know to be 90 cents. So we have 0.9 here, 0.1 here. My multiplier, I will get 1 divided by 0.1. So overall, a $500 billion change.